Alright then, so it's time for a little bit of lore. So we're back here at Kroshkur, the Hidden Sanctuary. That which teaches history, what do you have to tell me? And before we basically, go on here, let's just, lower the audio option here a little bit. So let's go, maybe free. One, I guess. Kroshkur is like one of the worst places for audio background music, so bear with me while I basically load right down to one, but whatever. Alright, so we basically have a few of the Mightier Than God series basically up here. We have some demystification of the gods. We have the history of Kroshkur over here. So let's get to it, shall we? Let's start with the history of Kroshkur here. Alright, so the story of Kroshkur is not a peaceful one. Those of us who gathered here know that we have no place anywhere else. The surface world will never accept us, for our forms are terrible for them to behold. Even in the depths of the Maj'Eyal, we have had to fight for our place in the world. These endless tunnels and the creatures within them have sought to destroy us. They hunger for our very souls. When Kroshkur was first discovered, it was infested with horrors. We cut them down and attempted to restore the strange arcane machines we found here. Alas, we found it to be too damaged and could only partially restore it. But even the small amount of power it held was enough to give us safety. Many followed after us after that, outcasts who were looking for a haven and a hostile underground. Intelligent beings who do not belong anywhere else, seekers of forbidden knowledge and those who have seen too much for mortal eyes to bear, are just a few who have made their homes here. Since then, we have studied. We have divined this world's secrets, and delved into the dark places which surface dwellers dare not look, out of fear of what might be looking back. We have no such fear, for we are the things looking back. In these places, we have found out many truths and discovered magics which will change the course of Maj'Eyal's history. We will bide our time down here, in the dark, and turn this place into a beacon of knowledge. If this world will not give us a place in it, then we shall simply take one for ourselves. We shall make ourselves known to the surface when the time is right, and show them that we aren't just scared, mindless beings for them to sweep aside. So, I'll note by the way that, Kroshkur is basically the founding city of the Drem, which are basically a race of they're basically a dwarven race, but they're a little bit different from the dwarves. And as you basically go along with the story, you'll basically see why they're basically a little bit different than the dwarves and stuff like that. But anyhow, we'll basically get to the Drem, I'll actually show that off, I guess. But that'll be farther down the line, and not this right now. So let's continue on. The history of Kroshkur number 2. We were few once, just outcasts from some crevice in dark places that everyone else forgot about long ago. When we claimed this fortress, more began to come. Not horrors, not surface dwellers, but those of us caught in between the two. Some of us were born this way, while others were altered by forces beyond our understanding. The only thing that is common among us all of us, is that we simply don't belong anywhere. With conscious minds, we completely understand the horrors of Maj'Eyal's deaths. with twisted and corrupted bodies no civilized people would tolerate our presence among them. When we reside in Kroshkur, however, we are craftsmen, scholars, hermits, poets, and warriors. To that end, we all gathered here, and we spitefully for how this world openly rejects us. Are we spiteful for how this world openly rejects us? It would be a lie if we said no. To that end, we shall plunge our head first into the places no one else dares look. We shall use the dark secrets of this world to carve out our own place in it. We shall create wonders while the world above us rests in fitful dreams. In many ways, this sort of like sounds like the Verloren, like, sort of like, outpost, so to speak, but, whatever. It is what it is. And then we go on to number 3 here. The history of Kroshkur number 3. Why do we struggle on? What is Kroshkur's plan? It is simple. We will take the knowledge other races have rejected and use it to transform ourselves. No more shall we be wretches who hide away from the light. We will become the new gods, the ones who bask in the sun's embrace, proudly standing atop of the civilization we built. We will surely find our answer among those ancient ruins, and when we do, we shall be as far from the surface dwellers as they are from the worms. It is this dream which keeps Kroshkur alive. Even as our bodies continue to warp and decay, we hold on to the hope that we will find a way to reshape ourselves into something better. We will not need anyone's permission to exist on that day. Alright, so basically there's the lore, but whatever, let's just get to it, shall we? So, there's still a bit more to get to, so here's the Demystification of the Gods, Prelude. So I already saw a bit of this series already, but let's just read this here a little bit. So, gods are beings which have been frequently mentioned throughout Yael's history. They are a foreign concept to most readers, since most Yaelites of the current age have not encountered them. The word God gives you the impression of some almighty and obscenely powerful being, which these beings most certainly are. But there have been little scholarly work dedicated to defining what exactly God is. Multiple cultures across Yael's history all have varying descriptions of the gods, despite the same names frequently appearing among them. As a scholar of Kroshkur, I spent much time wandering the surface of Yael and learning from the surface races regarding gods, including many famous places of learning such as Engluin. It was a hard sell, but I even managed to convince an imp to retrieve certain documentation on Uruk as well. This series of documents has been written to catalog information regarding the gods and to develop an as accurate picture of them as myth and history will allow. And this preface is to give a general impression of what exactly a god is supposed to be. There have been many powerful beings who have walked across the surface of Yael. Being a god isn't simply a question of power, however, despite the enormous strength of these beings. What separates gods from the other beings is their ability to reverse entropy. For future reference, we shall refer to this power as entropy. This power also allows them to reshape reality to their own whims and desires. Some gods made their own races. Others merely altered beings living on Yael, playing with their evolution and changing them in infallible ways. While some might attribute this behavior to some greater purpose, there is more than enough evidence to suggest that gods are fallible and motivated by things just as petty as we mere mortals. Blah. They're fallible and motivated by things just as petty as we mere mortals. In my scholarly opinion, we were simply created for their amusement. While this might drive some to despair and make them believe the moral world is pointless, it is noted in ancient myth that the gods were slaughtered by the Shar-Trul and driven away from our world. Whether or not this absence can be considered a good thing, it cannot be said. There are some surviving stories of the gods' blatant cruelty and complete disregard for the races they made as they squabbled away among each other, rocking great scars across the surface of this world. It is also noteworthy that the gods, despite their impressive power, were not always intelligent beings. Some were believed to be barely sapient, or even sentient. One theory about this is that the gods were primitive beings living on Yael's surface, and just so happened to be infused with entropy energies, artificially elevating them above our primitive life forms. With these things established, we will discuss the gods of Yael and what influence their actions had and continue to have on our world. While I discovered many gods in my studies, it is entirely possible that Eyal had even more gods than what are documented in my findings, but their existence cannot be substantiated by existing scholarly texts. So, basically it's like telling you, like, a little bit like about the gods of this world, and there may be more gods than what's basically been mentioned in the game, so there is that, but whatever. Alright, so, let's go to Chapter 1. Amakvil, the god of Shartul. Even among the gods, there was one that towered above them all. Its name was Amakvil, mightiest of Eyal's gods. It was said that it was the creator of the Shartul, that ancient and mysterious race whose true nature is still unknown to this day. More than any other god, Amakvil appears as a creation figure in ancient myths, more readily interfering with mortal beings than any other god. Nearly every race has some myth of Amakvil coming into contact with them, some describing it as a glowing divine being, while others declared it as a bringer of ill omens. Its touch seemed to curse or as readily as it blessed according to those different sources, altering beings in ways that only made sense to Amakvil itself. As such, it is difficult to get a clear picture of Amakvil's true personality and disposition towards mortals. How exactly Amakvil's downfall came is not certain. Some myths say that the Shartul were commanded by their creator to kill the gods, while others suggest that the Shartul openly rebelled against them. So, I know basically, like, I think in like the myth, basically the Shartul sort of like took up arms against like the other gods at the command of Amakvil, but eventually they turned on Amakvil themselves and like took him out as well. And I'm not sure, but I think Amakvil is basically like the disembodied god that you're basically like stopping from being resurrected in like the second like chapter of this game, like Embers of Rage of the orcs. But whatever. All right, so let's go to Chapter 2, Kroshkur. Kroshkur, the god of illusions and deceit, was perhaps the most petty god of Eyal. The myths of Kroshkur are often tragedies describing the downfall of his latter character after trusting a mysterious stranger. Due to the consistency of these stories, it can be concluded that Kroshkur did not care for meddling with things on a large scale, but preferred a much smaller one. It delighted in understanding what drove more races, and how it could bring a single person to ruin with nothing but words and clever lies. It always revealed itself at the end of the tale, its hapless victim realizing that they had been fooled all along. In this sense, Kroshkur was cruel, in a way that was distinct from the other gods. When the god slayer Brenzir came for it, Kroshkur came to know fear and fled. The chase between the god and god slayer was the stuff of legend, and many myths tell of the great trials which Brenzir overcame in his pursuit of Kroshkur. In the last moments of the chase, Kroshkur was spared and told to leave Eyal by Brenzir. However, Kroshkur later returned and struck a terrible blow against Brenzir's homestead, slaying his family and his servants. The already driven Brenzir became obsessed with Kroshkur and chased it across the entirety of Eyal. Having nowhere else to run after stumbling into a dungeon, Kroshkur chose to go down into Eyal's depths, creating a layer upon layer of illusions, creatures, and distractions to prevent the relentless Brenzir from catching it. Since no one can enter this dungeon without leaving, it can only be guessed at how deep the dungeon has become. Some say it is infinite, and that the chase between the hunter and hunted continues to this day. So, for those who basically know about like the infinite dungeon, that's basically like Kroshkur and like Brenzir and like their myth and all that. But whatever. We basically already basically seen this in the game, so it's like nothing new. All right, so mightier than gods, basically got the god slayers here. So let's just talk about this a bit of lore here, I guess. All right, so as part of scholarly pursuits in the nature of Eyal's gods, the rules of Shartul and their demise must not be forgotten. It was 9 Shartul who slayed the gods, figures now known as the God Slayers. Beyond that, little about these individuals can be said with any certainty. The Shartul are believed to have mastered many forms of technology, magical spells, and psionic techniques. There is not a single force on Eyal, then or now, which could hope to match their might. Using these techniques in ways that we could not even guess at, they forged the weapons which would kill Yale's gods, 9 in total for each of the 9 god slayers who would wield them. This series will now analyze the little information about the god slayers that is still available. Given the obscure nature of the Shoto race, there are no solid records regarding their most prominent figures. Alright, so we already heard about Branzir from the Valkyria lore, but let's just read about Branzir here. So, Branzir, for reasons unknown to us, appears to have plenty of surviving documents regarding his life. The recurring story was that he was nobility of some sort. A huntsman renowned for his ability to track and slay beasts, which he did purely for sport. The Sure Tool had no worry or need of any resource, so many of them dedicated most of their time to leisurely pursuits. Branzir being no exception. He was given a mighty blade and held to the gods relentlessly. According to the surviving records, he successfully slayed at least 2 gods by himself, and is apparently still pursuing the god Valkyria to this day. So, basically one of the more successful, god slayers. And now we go to Kalizar. All Godslayer myths come back to one figure. Kaldazar was the one who guided the God Slayers and led the Shartul against the gods of Yal. His standing in Shartul society is not completely clear, but given the resources he commanded and his influence over Shartul, it's thought that he was one of their leaders, or at least a prominent figure in Shartul society. The god hunt started because Amakfeld commanded Shartul to slay the other gods. Kalizar personally went out and audited potential candidates to wield the Godslayer weapons. He too chose to wield Godslayer, becoming the leader of the 9 who would take part in the god hunt. However, as the Godslayers did their work, they began to think about how Amakfeld was using them as tools to meet his own end. Their creator, while it wielded great power, had the intellectual capacity of an infant compared to the Shartul. In the end, it was Kalizar who commanded the Shartul to slay Amakfeld. It was thought that this command was not carried out by all Shartul, and was in fact openly reviled by many of them, leading to conflicts within their ranks. There are no records of the Shartul after Godhead ended, let alone of Kalizar. No one is certain what became of their race. It is also noted that there is a strange absence of Shartul ruins on Yal, almost as if they have been removed. Alright, so that's a little bit about Kalizar. I'm not sure if I think this is one of Shartul basically meet. Basically, if we go into the Farporol, basically in the Shartul fortress too many times. There might be some other renowned Shartul basically run out against. So whatever. All right, so Osray. Osray the Wanderer was considered to be mythical, even among the Shartul themselves. He spent most of his days wandering across the surface of Yal, quietly observing the younger races as they emerged from barbarism. While most Shartul chose to stay away from what they saw to be the lesser species, Osray took his time to walk among them and even speak with them. He carried a plain iron staff with him whenever he walked, an antiquated weapon which he cherished deeply. He too was asked to become a Godslayer, for his prowess with his staff was the stuff of legends. He refused politely, but again and again, the request for his assistance kept coming. After washing the land, he wanted to burn around him. Okay, don't know what that means, but whatever. He finally chose to take a stand against the gods of Yal. He was presented with Yurful, a uniquely made staff with a crescent blade on one end. So basically he's got a scythe. When he fought against the gods, he acted completely without passion. His staff hammered them down, sliced them open, and slaughtered them. He killed without mercy and without malice. When the last of the gods were dead, he returned to his wanderings, carrying Yurful and his old iron staff with him. So, basically he's still wandering about and all that stuff or whatever. Alright, so, that's basically the lore that's from his library, but before basically sort of end this episode, I wanted to I did write a couple pieces of lore that you've actually already basically seen. So I figured I'd basically go over them again because, well, it may not be that evident, but I actually wrote the opening lore for Kroshkur here with people basically entering here, as well for the Krog. And I sort of forgot about it until I actually looked at my notes to see, like, what lore I actually sort of, like, wrote. So there is sort of like that. But, whatever. We're just going to quickly go and, like, basically start a new character for, like, the Krog and for, like, this is someone with the riffing on, like, their race, class, basically. So you can basically see the lore again. I'm also not sure, but I think I may have like actually wrote the lore for like the Krog, basically, like they're like their intro into like the races, like races for like Green Dot's like analysis of races. Though I don't think I've basically come across their lore basically just yet, so I can't really show it to you guys just yet. So there's that. All right, so we got the Krog here. So intro show off. Let's just go like Krog Archer for now. And we'll basically skip the leveling here because I don't really need to do it, so whatever. So, basically, here we go. You are a Krog, a former ogre stripped of his ruins by the Ziggurat. Ogres cannot live without ruins, yet you, a Krog, have been kept alive by the powers of nature coursing through your body. All Krogs are infused with anti-magic forces as a result of the changes made to their bodies by the Ziggurat. While much of Maj'Eyal shuns the arcane, there are still those who practice it, and you would like nothing more than eradicate them from the world. You have come to an old ruin named Korpool on a mission to eliminate the fallacy of arcane creatures, fallacy of arcane creations, undead. So yeah, basically like I wrote like a lot of like these like sort of intro lores for these guys here. So basically there's like the intro lore for this guy. I'll note, by the way, like that's basically like as far as I basically went. I didn't design like any of like the racials for this guy here, but I believe I did like sort of contribute to like what basically like towns basically sort of like were, but I didn't design these basically personally, but I can't really like give like and like sort of like ownership basically for that basically, but whatever. I'm not sure, but I think I may have suggested that like to Dark they like do like the double wheel like one-handed weapons, but it's over 4 years ago. I can't remember like what I contributed basically, and that like sort of like realm of like expertise, so to speak. Anyhow, let's just go to a new game here again. And I'll note by the way this before I forget about it. They're like basically have like this little bit over here. So Krogs were formerly ogres that have been radically changed, stripped of the ruins from their bodies. The Ziggurat have managed to prevent the Krog from dying by injecting them with a concoction of natural infusions and drake blood. The Krog are entirely devoted to the anti-magic cause and seemingly know of nothing else in their lives. So I wrote that as well, by the way, but you get the idea, so to speak. But whatever. All right, so let's just get to like the Demented here. So let's begin our like guy here for like intro 2. All right, so now I'm not by as well. I believe I also suggested to like Dark God to basically like this stuff be bolded down here by way like you ultimately choose like the portal to teleport out or Kroshkur be destroyed. I'll basically like, get to that in a moment, but let's just read through like the script here basically. So you are one of several like-minded individuals that delves into knowledge long lost and forgotten, seeking sanctuary from an outside hostile world to such activities. Delving into research within the forgotten and inactive fortress of Kroshkur, the reasons of pursuit differ among the myriad topics. Some look to uncover knowledge hailing back to the Age of Haze, when beings immensely powerful walked Yal, while others explore in the origins of themselves and other races. Regardless of the subject or method of research, no rules exist to constrain anyone in their approach. This has led to experimentation into what many would deem mad and certainly forbidden among the surface dwellers. If Kroshkur were to be found, it would most certainly be destroyed. Therefore, the only rules that truly exist in this sanctuary are to have secrecy and safeguarding the accrued knowledge that has been obtained therein. But today, the sanctuary is threatened by a giant worm that is tunneling directly towards Kroshkur. If nothing is done, it will collide with and destroy what remains of the ancient fortress. One idea to dealing with the worm is for someone to teleport inside it and make their way towards the worm's brain, cluster and destroy it. Alternatively, you consider leaving before the worm arrives and finding your own purpose in the outside world. As with all things here, nothing restrains you in what path you ultimately choose. The question is where you step into the portal to teleport into the worm, or leave now while it's safe to do so, and let Kroshkur be destroyed. So, yeah, I basically wrote this little bit right here, and yeah, I basically, suggested to Dark God that, if it's possible, bold this stuff over here, so, it sort of, hints that, to the player, if you don't do this, then something is going to be, it's basically mutually exclusive. It's, these options here, so either you teleport into the worm and you basically, take out the worm, or you don't, and basically, around, level 3, you basically have, that giant worm basically running around, the God Feaster, basically, so. Alright, so that's basically, sort of a breakdown of, all the lore basically sort of wrote here. But, before we basically go, we're just going to exit the game here, and I'm just going to go to my Google documents, so to speak. I'll put them as own recording, so one moment is going to, just pause right here. Alright then, so I think I'm ready to continue on, so there's a little bit of show and tell by the way, but yeah, basically, as I've basically sort of been harping on here, I basically did write some of the lore for this, game here, so, basically I wrote some, item lore, other lore, weapon lore, and other stuff basically here, so, well, let's just, go into it, shall we? So, first things first, you basically already seen a lot of this basically, but I wrote basically the Escapades of Fey Willows right here, and, I wrote all, the 5 books basically for it, so, yeah, basically, it's a very long Google Doc file because, there is that much lore, but, you get the idea. But yes, I basically have all the books of, lore for, the Escapades of, Fey Willows, and, when I get around to, getting all, book 5, I'll basically, review that basically in-game, so, let's see, let's just get down here a little bit. So, Escapades of Fey Willows, book 5, chapter 1, Dead on Arrival, so, I have all this lore basically already, because I wrote it, so, obviously I know what the lore basically is, but, I'll try and find basically in the game. And let's just go down here a little bit just to note something. So, a note basically as well, by the way, book 5 is actually, the longest book I basically, wrote basically for, Escapades of Fey Willows, because it's a little bit different from, the other 4 books. On the one I was actually writing, the Escapades of Fey Willows, I had a very, distinct sort of, writing style, where, I basically, wrote down, say, 4, paragraphs for, each sort of, section of, Fey's, Willows, journey, so to speak. And basically, there's, when we're getting around to it, I had, something like, 27 chapters, this beginning out. And when I basically was going around, to, book 5, I sort of, broke from that, sort of, tradition of, the first 4 books, because I feel at this point it's sort of as some immersion to Fae, basically, showing how she basically matured in Elvia and all this stuff, basically, with now using names a little bit more freely and stuff like that and all that stuff. But I'll note that basically is the longest book that I'll have to go through. There's basically 7 chapters in this one as opposed to the 5 from the other ones. And by the way, I'll note that some things basically is to watch out for with chapter 5, or not chapter 5, but yes, chapter 5. Chapter 5 for book 5 here. Some of the stuff basically from this this piece of lore, it actually did sort of inspire Dark God to do some changes for the Necromancer class. So I'm not sure basically how the Necromancer basically work at this point, but he had mentioned that he very much liked the idea of the Necromancer in my story basically having this sort of staff made from custom staff he basically sort of made himself. And he thought that'd be a very cool sort of talent type of thing for Necromancers basically having a game where they actually make their own stats to sort of wander around with. I'm not sure how Necromancers have been changed. I should probably go check that out myself. But this is a throw out there. It's this actually did have a little bit of inspiration for Dark God to work with. So I'm quite proud about that. I also note by as well. I also wrote some other lore here as well. So let's just go to weapon lore here. I'll note that basically, You already basically seen this a little bit, but you know, I basically have like, you know, the Krog mace and the Krog, like, you know, sword. So here's something very interesting about these, like, you know, weapons. I didn't actually design the names for each of these weapons, by the way. So Perseverance and, like, you know, whatever the other, like, you know, name for, like, the, you know, the other weapon basically is. I have no idea what the, like, other name basically is because I didn't actually write those names. I only wrote the actual lore for these weapons here. So basically, like, you for one here, you see, like, you know, it's said that the third weapons of Krog mace in one hand and sword in the other. One hand is to spread the message of the Ziggurat, the other is to see the message through to the end. So the mace basically symbolizes the Krog's willingness to endure until the final blow is struck against the arcane. Commonly, the mace would be used to batter it makes senseless, thus preventing them from being able to cast their spells. And its sword over here basically symbolizes the Krog's commitment to their task in fighting against the forces of the arcane. With each slash, the Krog would endeavor to continue until at last their opponents would fall. And apparently I spelled endeavor wrong, so I wonder if that's basically wrong in the game. By the way, spell check. I did not use it all the time, so yeah, there might be some, like, you know, mistakes like that, but whatever. That by the way as well, I actually, like, rewrote the opening lore, I believe, for, like, you know, Kroshkur, by the way, because one of, like, the Let's Players basically on YouTube actually reviewed the like, you know, the game after, like, it was basically released, noted, like, you know, he didn't really like the intro like that much as how it's basically written, so I actually had to, you know, go back and, like, you know, actually, like, you know, help basically fix that for that reason, but whatever. Let's see here, item lore. So I'm not sure if this is basically in the game or not, but, you know, I actually wrote down, like, you know, an idea for, like, you know, an item basically that could be in the game. So during the Age of Dusk, a rash of anti-magic activities took place in Nargol Kingdom immediately after Spellblaze. Citizens would turn on those with magical powers, burning them alive on stakes of wood. When they found the perpetrators, they executed them and planted their heads on stakes throughout the capital city. Despite this, however, the citizenry continued to burn alive to the image of nature. Unbeknownst to the authorities, the heads of the dead perpetrators continued to spread their message long after their deaths. This stick of wood appears to be one of those used to prop up one of the executed heads. It has seemingly absorbed the will of the head it propped up, and holding it, you can hear Ziggurat's message echoing through your mind. So, honestly, you can see where just, like, you know, sort of item basically takes inspiration from, like, my stories, because it basically, like, holds back to, like, you know, book 2 of, like, the Ziggurat, where, like, you know, they're basically, like, you know, going around, like, burning people, and, like, you know, this sort of, like, you know, basically tells you a little bit of story where, like, you know, eventually those guys got caught by the authorities, and, like, they were, like, you know, heads basically chopped off and, like, put on stakes. I'll note by just for a little bit of, like, reference to this, like, you know, this bit right here. This actually was sort of inspired by an anime bit I was basically watching at the time. Basically in it there's, like, you know, a sort of, like, rebellion against the kingdom, and, like, you know, there's basically these, like, you know, fellows with, like, you know, superpower, like, weapons and stuff like that. It doesn't really matter about the plot, but basically in, like, the story, one, like, the, like, you know, assassins, I guess we'll say, went to try and kill someone and she failed, and as a result she had her head basically chopped off and, like, you know, planted on a spike outside the city to sort of like a warning. And that's basically where, like, that's sort of, like, inspiration for, like, this, like, little piece of item basically came from. Okay, I just gotta hold off for a moment here. Alright, well, one gorgeous thing about this, like, you know, specific recording is I'm able to, like, you know, hit the stop button whenever, like, you know, something happens, so that's always nice. It means that, as opposed to, like, you know, having to, like, you know, edit the video, like, you know, post-edit, I guess, like, you know, just stop and start, basically, to, you know, make it that way, but whatever. That's not really what you're, like, listening to this video about, but, you know, whatever. Alright, so the lore I wrote. So, yeah, I'll note that basically, like, you know, here's, like, some of the lore, basically, where, like, you know, I wrote down, like, you know, the, like, sort of introductions to, like, you know, Kroshkur here, so, welcome, blah, blah, it's, like, you know, you already basically saw me read this in the game, but, you know, here's, like, the introduction to Kroshkur, basically, like, you know, what's the choice. There's one for, like, the Krog right there, so. So, yeah, basically, there's, like, the one for the Krog. It puts the Raft of Wild's talent, which they sends them into a blind rage and gives them a chance to stun Dason foes with their attacks. You know, I'm actually one of like wrote down, like, the, like, introduction for, like, you know, the Krog basically in the game itself, and I may have, like, only wrote down, like, you know, their, like, you know, intro basically on, like, the, you know, the creation screen. So maybe I didn't write the one, like, into like, you know, the game itself. I just, like, only wrote the, like, you know, sort of, like, you know, race description. So yeah, I maybe claim credit for something I didn't, like, write, but, you know, I did write basically the, you know, just basically right here. So there's that. And you basically get to see it, but there's like, basically like the intro for like the Krogs basically, and like the analysis of the races. So you basically see like, I'll basically read this when I get around to it. Basically like, that's basically what the I basically wrote for like discovering the Krog. When I was basically writing up the Krog like, intro here, I basically like thought like how would the Krog basically differ themselves from say the ogres and like the other races basically in the game. And basically like how would like the writer basically write them like basically up, and like this is like how I basically chose to like describe them. Basically they're like the youngest race. They're obviously basically under like direct influence of the Zingers, because like the Zingers obviously had direct influence over them. Like they even say so. And what that makes like people wonder like how much influence that may have been. And you basically see a little bit about like how basically like, they're a little bit different from like the other races, like because like they want to like be noticed like scary to do like a lot of heroic deeds and stuff like that. So the many stories and songs and artwork are relevant around many pursuits basically. So yeah, I'll get around to that when I get around to it. But Bobby can actually, as always, Bobby can like pause recording to like read this basically right here, for example, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and there's like the continuation of like if it right down there, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll basically read this when I actually get into it in the game itself, but there's basically the lore, like as it's gonna be basically, like, coming forward basically. So, all right, well, that's basically like a little like breakdown of like the lore. So sort of I basically sort of like wrote, and like the lore was basically in Kroshkur right there. I'll look basically like past like the lore of like you have to read basically for like the the analysis of like the Krogs, book 5 of like Fables. I don't think there's any other lore basically like outside like what you basically saw here that like I wrote. So there's not a whole lot of lore I basically wrote for this game, but I did like write a suitable amount that like it shouldn't be like overlooked, I guess, but whatever. All right, so there won't be that many more of these like 0.5 episodes in this like place for like the Halfling like Writhing one, but there will be a little bit more basically after this, of course. So bear with me when I basically around to it, but until then, take care basically.